Now the time has come for whom we are waiting for long. Now I take this privilege to request Honorable Dr. S. Jaishankar and to address the business community of Uganda. Thank you.
Honorable Minister, Excellency Mabesa Francis, Shri Ravi Patel ji, Shri Mohan Reddy ji, distinguished business personalities in the room. Let me say what a great pleasure it is to be with all of you this evening. This is my first visit to Uganda. I came here yesterday. We've had 2 very busy days. And I am here obviously in pursuance of expanding our historical relationship. And at the core of that is really expanding our business cooperation. And I thank you today for giving me the opportunity to meet all of you, to share my views, to encourage you in many ways. And I certainly hope to do that in the coming evening. I arrived yesterday and had the honor immediately on arrival to call on His Excellency the President. And interestingly, the main message that he gave to me, he said, our political relations are great. We have this long tradition of cooperation. There's an Indian community here which is doing very well. So when we came down to the brass tacks, and he was quite direct about it, the message which he gave me was, how do we find ways of, in his words, doing a value add on what is the current state of business between the 2 countries. And I think it's a very, very pertinent point because if we look at the state of the economies of India and Uganda, what is clear is that at both ends and in the world, there are a lot of changes going on, and the challenge for us is really to capture those changes. Capture those changes and harness it for the benefit of our respective economies. The gentleman here was very kind enough to give you my data, my curriculum vitae. I thank him for it. There was a little bit which he did not mention, and I thought in the present gathering it's appropriate I mention it, which was after I did about 4 decades in diplomacy and before I joined politics, which was about 4 years ago. I did a year in business. I did a year in business as in Tata Sons as the president of their global affairs, global strategy. And I mentioned this to you because the perspective that I bring to bear on this relationship is actually greatly enriched by that exposure, the hands-on exposure that I had to business at that time. And I do carry from that period a very sharp realization that at the end of the day, governments may have a lot of goodwill for each other. We may reach, every visit has nice sounding outcomes and good communiques, but finally where the rubber hits the road, it's all about business. Good relationships, strong relationships need in some form or the other to reflect that in terms of numbers. So a large part of my endeavors during this visit and when I go back to India would really be to see how is it that we can expand those numbers, what are the new opportunities that are coming up, what are the areas perhaps we have not looked at, what is it we can do differently, what is it we can do better. And this is where obviously your partnership, your contribution, your interest is very significant. During this visit, I should just also share with you that today I had the pleasure of doing a virtual inauguration of our development projects which would provide drinking water to 20 rural districts of Uganda. I believe it would cover about 500,000 Ugandans. Tomorrow I will be joining the Defence Minister and the Ugandan leadership at the inauguration of the National Forensic Science University campus here. It's the first time our Forensic Sciences University is actually establishing a campus outside India, and to me it's very revealing, very interesting that they have chosen Uganda. Of course, you know that the university is in Gujarat, so maybe there's some obvious logic there, but nevertheless, I think it's a very So let's come back to business. Today, what you see in India as a partner is actually a major economy, a large economy, which is expected to grow at least 6.5%, probably higher once some of the stresses on the world economy due to the Ukraine conflict recede. But we have a good decade plus of very, very solid growth ahead of us. And those of you who would have been to India in recent years would actually see what that means on the ground. In fact, at lunch, the minister and I were discussing our memories of India. That, what was Mumbai like, what was Delhi like, what was Calcutta like, as I told him, what was Bangalore like 20 years ago, 30 years, 40 years ago. But I would say even someone who has been to India 5 years ago would be quite struck by the changes which have happened in the last 5 years. Changes which have happened, one, perhaps the most striking part of it is actually on the digital side. The rapid and extraordinarily effective digitalization of India, which allows an enormous number of services, both government services, public services, as well as business services, to be delivered through a digital India. Two, the pace and the spread of construction that you see, especially of the infrastructure. The fact that today there is an integrated infrastructure approach which is called Gati Shakti, so that different parts of the infrastructure progress are harmonized and they do not in any way make it disturb each other while doing so. So wherever you go in India today, you are actually seeing roads being built, bridges and tunnels and metros coming up, construction of various kinds. And itself a very sharp awareness of what the urban services are there. The third change is the health change. The health change because all over the world in the last 3 years, the sensitivity, the priority to health has actually increased remarkably. And in our case, what happened when the COVID hit us was, nobody was really prepared for the COVID, but there were different levels of unpreparedness. I think when it first hit us in India, actually we really struggled to even meet many of the basic requirements because that had not been the history in the past. And when we see what we've been able to do in the last 3 years, I would say it's really a story certainly worth telling, but more important, worth seeing. So you have infrastructure moving, you have very rapid digitalization, you have a very And the fourth element is really green growth. They're the largest renewable programs today. The most imaginative embrace of green growth in different ways is actually happening in India. Now, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because these are the core areas today of not just India's growth, but also of the partnership that India offers to other countries and other continents. And certainly when we look at Africa, these are areas where, as from a policy perspective, there is a lot that we are willing to put on the table. These are, I discussed today with my counterpart, these are really the areas we would like to see this relationship focus on. Now, having said that, there is actually also the natural consequences of progress and prosperity. Again, one of the interesting indicators of this is as the world is returning to post-COVID normalcy and you travel around, a striking feature is really how many more Indians today are there in different geographies as tourists. I had my small stab at tourism today between various programs. I thought at least I should get on a boat and go to the lake. And I learned in the process that the number of Indian tourists coming to Uganda too have increased in recent years. And I can tell you, this is a global phenomenon that in markets where, yes, there were Indian tourists, but not in those numbers. Markets like not just Maldives and Sri Lanka, but faraway markets like Thailand, like Serbia, like Austria. These are all markets today where actually there's growing Indian tourism presence. And a lot of that is actually reflected in the very rapid recovery of the airline industry in India. That if you look at the airline industry, which all over the world is going through a very difficult time, the readout from India actually is a relatively positive one because it captures a lot of the interest today in tourism. It's also true, Indian exports today are doing very well. That a year ago, we actually, Prime Minister Modi set for us what at that time we thought was a very ambitious target of our export in goods target of $400 billion. 2 years ago, we actually exceeded it by about 10%. And this year, we actually are probably adding maybe another $35 billion to what we did the previous year. So I say, this at some with some emphasis to give you that sense that when you think about India, this is a very energetic economy at this time, very robust in its growth, very strong in its prospects. Now, having said it, I also want to point out what's in it for you. And the example which I gave the minister earlier in the afternoon. A year ago, when the Ukraine conflict started, obviously the first hit which the world economy took was in the price of oil. Very soon thereafter, there was a big issue with the price of wheat because the oil prices, of course, was a more complicated issue. The wheat was a direct outcome of the lack of exports from Ukraine, which was a big exporter of wheat. What was a less noticed story was actually the problems which a country like India faced in terms of edible oil, because we were big importers of sunflower oil from Ukraine. And the pressure on us to find compensatory sources actually took Indian importers well beyond their traditional sources. A lot of those sources were in the ASEAN. It actually took them to Latin America. So if you look today at the big spike in India's trade with Latin America, interestingly, some of that is oil in terms of fuel oil, but a large part of it is oil in terms of edible oil. And I cite this as an example of what are the kind of demands that the Indian market offers. So even when we speak about greater infrastructure growth in India, when we speak about the prosperity which comes with better health, with better education, with stronger social delivery, all these actually are factors of demand. And the challenge, I would say, the business challenge for the relationship is really to look at what are the predicted demands at the two ends and to see whether there is a strategy to target those demands. Now those demands, as I point out, could be in services. They could be demands of tourism, but they could be demands of consumption, like the edible oil case that I mentioned, and probably a lot in between. I really think today that part of our growing relationship with Africa, relationship with Uganda, because that is very much at the center of what we are doing with Africa. There are the other bits which we spoke about, the education, the training, the exchanges, the development partnership. But to me, the core of the relationship which we need to address is how do we expand business between our two countries. I certainly would urge all of you to look at these possibilities, and I certainly assure you from our side there is a great deal of interest, a lot of empathy in actually trying to find ways of growing this trade, and I hope today's evening is one small contribution to enhancing our interest in this relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable, for giving us so much insight about the business worldwide. And I've also taken a note about your business. Now, I would like to request Mr. Harish to take over from